about right now. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to week 2 of Operation Med School's Toronto weekly webinar series. My name is Gary Busy, and I'm one of the logistics coordinators this year. Today, we're joined by Danielle Lewis, an MD candidate at the University of Toronto Faculty of Medicine. Danielle will be entering her second year of medical school. Prior to medical school, she completed 3 years of a BSc in Biological Sciences at Ontario Tech University, with a specialization in life science before receiving early acceptance to medical school. During this time, Danielle was involved in many initiatives on and off campus. Through her Instagram page, @medbime, we'll put that in the description box, she shares her journey to medical school, her experiences as a medical student, and advice for pre-med students pursuing their goals of becoming physicians. Danielle, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. So I'm really hoping today to kind of go through with you my journey to med school, focusing on high school, university, and then touching on how this past year has been. I just finished my first year, as Gerd said. So again, I started my Instagram account to advise pre-med students because when I was a pre-med student, I had no family members that were in medicine or anything like that. And mentorship was a big part of why I'm in medical school today and helped me a lot along the way. So I'm hoping this presentation can kind of help you guys and give you more insight into what the journey to an Ontario medical school can look like and some ideas on what you can get involved with to hopefully get into medical school one day. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and my presentation.
Okay, that's awesome. And by the way, everyone, we will be having a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. So if you have any additional questions for Danielle at the end, feel free to ask. So Danielle, whenever you're ready, you can begin your presentation.
Sure. Okay, so can you guys see? I'm going to take that as a yes. Okay. So my plan for today, again, was to discuss my journey to medical school. And as Gerd said, we'll have a Q&A after, but I'm hoping to answer a lot of questions within my presentation. So let's begin. So I just wanted to get a start or a head start on who is listening today, whether you're a high school student, an undergrad student, a master's student, PhD, taking a gap year, a mature student. Again, there's no correct place to start your journey to med school, and you can be any of these students and still successfully get into medical school in Canada. So for example, in my class, we have students from a wide background. So again, I welcome everyone who is listening today. Another question I had for you guys was how many times you've been told that it's impossible to get into medical school. So we have too many times to count, a lot, a few times, and never. So just take a moment to reflect on this. So I know for me, when I was a pre-med student, I was in the too many times to count boat. I was always told in high school it was impossible. I was told that through university. And I'm here hopefully today to motivate you guys that it's not impossible. Again, I'm just a normal student, nothing really special about me, and I was still able to get into an Ontario medical school. So let's begin. This is one of my favorite quotes is if your dreams don't scare you, they aren't big enough. This pushed me throughout my undergrad, and I always had it on my walls, on my screensaver, etc., to keep pushing to get into medical school. So I'm going to start all the way back in high school by giving you guys a bit of an overview about what my high school experience was like. So when I was in high school, I was a French immersion student. Going through high school, I literally had no plans of going to med school, right up until grade 12. I was really involved in music activities. I played a lot of piano, took lessons, and was a good student, but again, never really thought that medical school was in the cards for me. I wasn't involved in any extracurriculars at my high school either. So I know a common misconception is you have to be know what you want to do in high school and set yourself up in high school, which I think is kind of crazy looking back. So yeah, I didn't think I was going to medical school, was really into music, originally wanted to be a music teacher. And then when it came time for grade 11, when you were picking your more senior courses, I chose to pick courses in like the sciences and maths to kind of keep all of my options open, whether it be for like business, medicine, literally anything, accounting, even. I just took a broad range of subjects. And it wasn't until grade 12 biology that I really realized that I really enjoyed science, like physics, chemistry, and biology especially. And that's kind of when I decided that maybe I'd keep music as a passion, but I wanted to pursue a career in the sciences. So during my high school journey, again, I was a strong student. I had a 96 average in grade 12 of high school. And as I was saying, I kind of knew at this point that I wanted to go into the sciences, but I wasn't like sure exactly to where that would lead me. So whether it would be medicine, dentistry, research, master's degrees, I wasn't sure. So in grade 12, I decided to apply to general science programs. And I also had, or I was obsessed in grade 12 with Grey's Anatomy. So I guess medical school was like kind of on my radar, but I was always told that it was impossible to get in. So I didn't really take it too seriously or consider it as a serious career path. So, in terms of applying to universities, I applied to only two universities, which was Ontario Tech and U of T Scarborough. The reason I did this was because I really wanted to stay at home for university. So, these were the two schools that were closest to where I lived. Um, and I was accepted into the life sciences programs at both of these schools, so Ontario Tech and U of T. And then I was faced with the decision of what university to attend, which is a big choice for grade 12 students. So ultimately, Ontario Tech was closer for me to commute to, which I thought would be really beneficial in the end because with less commute times, I could spend more time studying. And I just thought my life would be overall easier if I went to the school that was closest to me. But also, I really liked that at Ontario Tech, it had a small campus size, like really small compared to U of T. And I felt like I'd get a more personalized education experience by attending a smaller university where I could really get to know my professors and classmates, etc. So I ended up accepting into Ontario Tech University for a Bachelor of Biological Sciences with a specialization in life science. Again, not really knowing what I wanted to do in the future. So this takes me to my university experience, and this is when I realized a bit late what I actually wanted to do, which was medicine. So I'll take you back to my first year of university. I went to university. I was nervous, as all first years are. I was really focused on achieving a high GPA because I knew no matter what I wanted to do after university, I would need a high GPA for. Again, medical school wasn't on my radar. I just knew I liked the sciences. I didn't really get involved in any extracurriculars on campus during my first year because I was so overwhelmed with just university in general. And on the side, as I mentioned before, I was really involved in music growing up. So I was teaching piano as a part time job on the side, starting in my first year of university. So I ran a music studio out of my house. And I also, halfway through the first year, started volunteering at a hospital. And this was really the turning point in my education where I decided medicine was something that I wanted to look into and try to pursue further. So, when did you guys realize you wanted to be a doctor? I hear these stories all the time. I'll let you reflect a bit on this. Some people knew, like, right when they were young, that that's what they wanted to do. Others may have known in high school. Um, Others, like me, figured it out in universities or later on in their life during a master's, or even later than that. So, did you guys feel like you were behind in your planning for med school at the point which you realized you wanted to pursue it? So, out of these options of absolutely, kind of, or no, I was definitely right here in the absolutely. So, I was basically at the end of my first year of university, had nothing to prep me for medical school at all because I didn't know I wanted to do that. And I just felt like I was really behind because I would hear these stories of students who, since they were 4, knew they wanted to be a doctor and they were like pursuing all these opportunities to strengthen their application, and I had nothing. So I'm here to tell you that if you are like me, that is totally okay. You don't have to know from a very early point that you wanted to go to medical school. So what I did was after I realized I had this epiphany about medicine at the end of my first year is I made a binder, which I have a little picture of right here, called Medical School. I kept everything in this binder that was important and pertained to medical school. So I researched all of the 6 schools that I wanted to apply to, so like U Ottawa, Western, McMaster, etc. I kept all of that information in this binder, and I sorted this binder based on what medical schools were looking for. So I'd have a section on extracurriculars, a section on research, and slowly over the years, my plan was to kind of fill up this binder so that when I came to my applications, I had everything in one centralized location. And again, it just kept me on track. I actually still have this binder here in my room that we can look at later if you're interested. So this brings me to my summer after my first year of university. So this summer, I realized I wanted to go into medical school and I had nothing for my application. So I was kind of torn also in this summer whether I should be taking summer school courses or not, because I was told that second year university was really hard and maybe I wanted to lighten my course load and take some summer courses. Um, to keep my GPA up. And I ultimately decided against this because it's really important for you guys to realize that some schools won't accept you if you have a reduced course load during your academic years. So instead of taking summer school courses to lighten my course load, I used this summer to build my extracurricular activities. And this is something I highly stress to university students because oftentimes we're really busy in the school year and we just don't have time to do a million and one things. So in the summer after my first year university, I applied to a lot of club positions on campus. I also knew that I really needed to get involved with research, which is a big like question mark for pre-med students, and I didn't really know how to go about this either. So what I did was I cold emailed research supervisors and PIs at a variety of institutes where I lived in my community that I knew conducted research. And I would write to them saying, "Hi, I'm a first year student. I just finished my first year in life science. I really would like some volunteer research experience. Do you have any positions?" And to my surprise, I actually ended up researching at 2 institutions from these cold emails. So you'd be surprised if you do put out like put the initiative in and contact supervisors that people are willing to take you even if you have no research experience. That's another one of my tips for going about finding research. And in addition to researching, I spent my summer just doing activities I liked. So I played soccer, I've been playing my whole life. I also worked throughout this summer too as a restaurant hostess. Um, and I started volunteering again at the hospitals throughout this summer. So it was quite busy for me and again was spent building my application. So during my second year of university, I also really wanted to get involved in extracurriculars because this is a big part of your medical school application. And I, again, like I said before, was applying for these positions. And what's really important to note if you're wondering what extracurriculars to get involved with is I know it sounds cheesy, but honestly, do the extracurriculars that you enjoy doing. So everything I was a part of, I really liked. So for example, I was a student ambassador, which is basically a student that volunteers at a lot of events on campus, so open houses like the Ontario University Fair, etc. I was also an orientation leader, as seen here, which I really enjoyed. So these were all leadership activities that allowed me to get involved on my university campus that I really enjoyed doing as well. And in terms of even more leadership activities, I think when you're in university, something to be cognizant of is that it's really easy to join clubs as a general member, but general membership doesn't mean anything on your medical school applications because it doesn't show any leadership. Um, or that you've organized any events yourself. So I would try to strive to find positions in which you can be an executive on like councils or student groups, etc. So two of the main positions I was in my university experience was a club called Students Recognizing the Resident, in which I was president of. So this was a club where we went to long-term care facilities and hospitals, and we threw parties for the residents, which was really cute. I had a lot of fun organizing these events too. This is a picture from one of our old Hollywood events that we threw at a retirement home. And in these events too, I kind of incorporated my passion for music. So I'd play piano for the residents during our events too. So it was a nice like mix of clinical experience, but also music as well. Another organization that I was a part of was the Youth Project, which was a club on my campus that raised funds for homeless youth. And I really wanted to get involved in this organization too, because I didn't have a lot of experience caring for marginalized populations. And that's something that you really need experience with, especially in medicine, because a lot of your patients will come from vulnerable populations or marginalized groups. And I think if you're looking for extracurriculars in university, anything where you're caring for or raising funds for vulnerable populations are also great extracurricular opportunities. So moving on to volunteering and what I did in my second year, as I mentioned before, I was a hospital volunteer. So I volunteered in both the emergency department and the research department at a local hospital. This gave me a lot of great clinical experiences. So in Canada, like unlike the US, it's harder to find actual clinical experiences that are paid, etc. So I think hospital volunteering is a really great way for students to get their foot in the door and kind of see what a career as a physician would look like and whether they like interacting with patients or not. I also ran a music therapy program at a hospital, again, combining my passion for music with clinical care, and that was really fun. And in addition to all of my hospital work, I volunteered at a local inclusive recreation facility. So this is basically a gym for persons with disabilities, and it's meant for everyone in the community to come to and exercise at and meet up as a community. So I spent a lot of time within this facility. There's a picture of me here from one of the events, researching and just general volunteering. In terms of my employment in second year, I was continuing to teach piano. I did this throughout my entire undergrad. I also took on TA-like positions in the university teaching chemistry. Again, teaching is something I really enjoyed, like whether it was piano or other subjects. And I spent my winter break again working at the same restaurant I worked in over the summer. Another thing I want to touch on was my shadowing opportunities, which I did in second year university. Um, so I shadowed within 3 specialties for a day or two, like nothing extensive or longitudinal. And how I got these positions was any physicians that I met, or even my own physicians, I would ask if there was any opportunities for student learners or shadowers. And because I was volunteering at a hospital already, I contacted the student liaison coordinators at that hospital, who then sent out my resume and like cover letters to all these physicians. And I picked up a few shadowing opportunities from there. So my biggest tip would be to network with any physicians you know. Like I said before, no one in my family is in medicine, so I really had to find these opportunities by myself. And something really important to note is shadowing is not required to apply to medical school. And I would say on your medical school applications, it's pretty insignificant. Like it doesn't mean that much because when you shadow, you're not doing anything, you're just completely observing. But it does give you a better idea of, again, what it's like to be a physician. Do you want to be a physician? Things like that. And that's why I really wanted to participate in shadowing opportunities. So this takes me to the end of second year. And during the summer of second year, I then went on to write my MCAT. So I chose to write my MCAT in the summer of second year because I figured if it didn't go well, I could still write in the summer of my third year to then apply to medical school in fourth year. And for my MCAT studying, I took an in-class Princeton review course, not so much for the content, but more to keep me on track with my learning and like stay motivated learning with my peers and everything. But again, definitely personal preference on whether you take a course or not. For me, since I came out of the life science program, I already knew basically everything that was tested on the MCAT. But I think for students who are coming from different programs, the in-class courses may be beneficial just to go over content in simpler terms. The MCAT is not a fun test. I don't want to scare anyone, but it was not fun to write. It took me 3 months of studying in the summer, full time, as if it was my part-time job or full-time job, sorry, to be ready to write my MCAT. And it takes a lot of dedication. So really, I decided for my summer of second year to put all of my time into studying. I only continued volunteering and researching in a reduced capacity. So I'd go to the hospital like 1 day a week for a full day, and that would be it. The rest of my time was spent studying. So this brings me to third year, which is when I was applying to medical school in the fall. So the application process for medical school is a full year. You apply in September for the following September. And if you haven't heard of what the application consists of, basically, one of the components is you have to complete what's called an autobiographical sketch, which is this long sketch listing 32 activities that you've been a part of since the age of 16. So if you haven't already started documenting what activities you've took part in, sorry, I would recommend doing that because you don't want to get to the application and then realize that you haven't been keeping track of your activities all along, and it will just give you a big headache trying to figure out everything you've been a part of since you were 16. Also, some schools require essays. So in Ontario, these schools are Western and Toronto. They require quite extensive essays in addition to their sketch. And other schools also require an ethical reasoning test called the Casper. So this is required by Ottawa and McMaster. And it's basically after you submit your application, you have to take this online computer test that gives you ethical scenarios and you answer by typing in your computer. So that's a bit about the application. The application takes a ton of work, and it's something that you really work towards for a long time to build your application. So that's why if you are considering medical school, it's important to start planning now, and it's not something that will come together overnight. And I often get asked how I was accepted early into medical school. So, 4 of the 6 Ontario schools you can apply to after completing 3 years of a bachelor degree. And because the cycle is the full year, September to September, this means that when you apply in September of your third year, by the time you're accepted in the following September, you will have completed 3 years of your bachelor degree. So, if you're applying early, you would apply in the fall of your third year. Not all students apply early. Most students apply in the fall of their fourth year because they want to complete their degrees and then go to medical school. But the reason I applied in third year was because I wanted to use this year as kind of like a practice round if I did get any interviews or anything, or even practice just applying to medical school to give me a better shot in fourth year, because I knew that third years often aren't accepted to medical school. Like the ratio is smaller coming out of third year and majority come out of fourth year university. So again, I applied in my third year. I'm always like nervous sharing my stats because it's so personal, but I thought it would help you guys, so I'm just going to share them. So on my MCAT, I scored a 509, which was mediocre, like not that great, not my proudest score. And I gave you guys the breakdown of my scores in each of the sections. So in the chemistry physics section, I scored 129. In cars, I scored 125, bio 128, and psych soc 127. So the MCAT is broken down into 4 sections, and they're all out of 131. So as you can see, my cars score or my reading score was pretty low, but it still made the U of T cutoff, so I was happy. But again, competitive MCAT scores are usually 510 to 515. I was aiming for a 510, but was still pleased with a 509, considering it was the first time I wrote it. But again, to offset my MCAT, I did have a 4.0 GPA at the time of my application. So I think this also, like, they take into account a mix of your MCAT and your GPA. So since my GPA was perfect, I think that helped my MCAT score to be pulled through for interviews. So I applied to the 4 schools that accept students after 3 years of a bachelor degree, which is U of T, Ottawa, McMaster, and Queen's. So after my applications, I continued throughout 3rd year with all of my extracurriculars and research activities. I took on a few new activities, like I started researching in a wet lab throughout the year. This is a picture of me doing some of the experiments. And then I added on a few more extracurricular roles that year too. So for example, the year before I was an orientation, just a general orientation leader, but then in 3rd year, I was a senior orientation leader in charge of the whole faculty of science. So kind of just moving up the ladder of extracurriculars, if you will, to gain more leadership experiences. So this brings me to my medical school interviews. Interviews happen at the beginning of the year generally, so like between February and March. And out of the 4 schools I applied to, I interviewed at Ottawa and U of T. They were within the same week in March, so it was really stressful. Both schools have different styles of interviews. So U of T does a modified personal interview, whereas Ottawa does a panel. So I was kind of prepping for both interview types simultaneously. I could do a whole other video on how to prep for medical school interviews, but just for the sake of this talk, I interviewed at these 2 schools. Here's a picture of me after I was done both my interviews, which was the best moment ever. And that brings me to acceptance day. So acceptances for medical school and offers of admissions are sent out on the 2nd Tuesday of May annually. So for me, it was May 14th of 2019. I received first that I was placed on the good wait list at U Ottawa. And then following that, I was accepted to Toronto. So I just wanted to quickly explain the process of Ottawa because it's a bit different in terms of offers of admission. So at Ottawa, you're either accepted, good waitlisted, or bad waitlisted. So there's no rejections at Ottawa. But essentially, if you're bad waitlisted, you're pretty much rejected. Being placed on the good wait list, I was actually really happy with because the wait list at Ottawa moves a lot. I think I've heard rumors that they accept around 100 students off the good wait list. So I was happy with Ottawa, but at that point really nervous because I hadn't heard back from Toronto. And then when I was accepted to Toronto, I was thrilled because it was always my top school or top choice school. So after I was accepted during my summer of my 3rd year university, I received an NSERC award to do research at Ontario Tech, my university, over the summer. Again, I applied to this program before realizing that I was accepted to medical school. So this was a really great experience. I gained a lot of research experience over that summer. I researched within exercise immunology. So I spent my whole summer analyzing saliva, is what I tell people. But it was really fun. And I did get a paper out of this opportunity, which is currently submitted and awaiting publication. This brings me to medical school, which I just started last August. So I just finished my 1st year of medical school last Friday, and it was absolutely amazing. Definitely more fun than undergrad. I've put in some pictures from my orientation and things like that. And yeah, it's just a lot more, I find, relaxed because you're not competing for grades and trying to get into medical school anymore. However, we're still trying to figure out what specialties we'd like to pursue, and the match process is still competitive depending on your specialty. So because of that, I'm still involved in a lot of extracurriculars and research projects and still figuring out what specialty I'd like to pursue. Obviously, because of the pandemic, we've been pulled from all clinical learning opportunities. So it's been a bit different over the past 3 months, and a lot of our summer plans got canceled. In terms of the medical school curriculum, every school is different, but for the most part, most medical schools have a pass-fail system. And when I came to medical school, I didn't believe that at all because we're so used to trying to getting these high grades that it didn't seem possible to me to have a pass-fail system. But I assure you that it is completely pass-fail. So in my program, for example, I have to maintain a 72, I think, in all of my courses for me to pass. no one ever looks at my grades after I meet the pass mark, and they're not used to determine whether you match into a certain specialty. So that takes a lot of pressure off in that regard. Obviously, you're still studying hard because now you need to know this knowledge for your future patients, but it's a lot less stressful than undergrad. And in terms of the medical school curriculum at U of T, I really love our curriculum. It's different than the other medical schools in that our curriculum is broken down into blocks. So every block is 2 to 4 weeks where we'll learn about a specific topic. So throughout first year, these topics were focused on like organ systems. So we do a block on cardiology, and then we do a block on resp, etc. And at the end of each block, we have an exam, but these exams aren't like finals or midterms. They're just low stakes assessments throughout the year. So what's nice about how medical school is broken down is that you no longer have midterm season or final exam season. You just have these smaller exams throughout the school year. In terms of anatomy, we do anatomy at U of T. U of T has a really, really great anatomy program, which is a mix of dissections and prosections. So dissections are when you're physically dissecting the cadaver, and prosections are when a specimen has already been dissected for you, and you can learn just from that dissected specimen. So for example, a prosection could be if you're studying like the nerves in your arm, you may have a prosection of a severed arm that you can then go through and trace all the nerves that have been nicely dissected already. So things like that. And in addition to our blocks and anatomy is that we have clinical skills learning, which is a big component of our education. And we spend a lot of time in the hospitals learning to interact with patients and learning how to do physical exams, etc. Obviously, these activities have been halted due to COVID, but prior to that, half of our learning was in classroom settings and half was at the hospital. And one last thing I want to note about the U of T curriculum is that it's very self-directed, unlike other medical schools. So for example, we only have 3 hours of lecture a week, and that's it. And the rest is self-learning modules. And we also have Wednesdays off, so we only go to school 4 days a week. So this gives you a lot of flexibility in your schedule for shadowing or other opportunities. And it's just, I really like the curriculum here. So I often get asked questions about things that I think made me stand out as an applicant. And I've kind of tried to group them into these points right here. So I think something that's really important when you're planning to go to medical school is the story that you tell through your application or through the extracurriculars and activities you were a part of. So for example, when I was in high school, like I said, I was really involved in music, and I never let that passion for music die out. Like I carried it through all of the activities that I did in university. I continued to teach piano, and I continued to incorporate music in the clubs that I led. So things like that, where you're like you don't give up on your passions and you carry them throughout your longitudinal activities. And when reviewers are reviewing your application, I really think that your application is like a story that you're telling about yourself in terms of the activities that you've been a part of. Another thing that I think made me stand out was I was very well-rounded in terms of my application. So I've listed here the 6 sections of the medical school application that you have to fill out on your sketch that I was talking about. And throughout university, I really tried to make sure I had entries for each of these sections. So no section was bigger than another or empty at all. And then finally, I think my GPA obviously helped and my MCAT score, because without those two, you can't apply at all without those stats. So my tips, if you're on your medical school journey or journey to medical school, is first, again, to ensure you have a high GPA and MCAT score. These are non-negotiables. If you don't have either or, your application won't even get looked at. So they're the first things that medical schools screen. Second is to get involved in longitudinal activities, again, that are meaningful to you, as I've tried to stress during this talk. Third, again, to ensure you're a well-rounded applicant. So you don't want to come to your application and then realize that, for example, your research section is empty and you don't have any entries for research. You want to make sure that throughout your journey, you're filling up your application with all of these six things. And I just wanted to add that in the other section, it can be anything you'd like, whether it's shadowing or random hobbies you partake in, etc. And then four, that it's never too late to pursue medical school and it's also not impossible. Again, I'd consider myself a late like starter in this whole process after first year university. But it like I thought it was too late, but it obviously wasn't. And I was still able to get in early after 3 years. So nothing is impossible. And don't let anyone tell you you can't do it, because I've heard that so many times and it's wrong. So with that, we can move into our Q&A period. Again, you can follow my Instagram account at medbyme. I do offer mentorship services, and I've put my contacts here. And as I was saying before, I really started this page to share my journey as a pre-med, which then turned into medical school. So yeah, that's about it, and we can move into the Q&A.
Okay. Danielle, thanks for your presentation and insight on being a med student. Personally, I'm very hyped right now. I feel very excited because like I do want to go into medicine, and just hearing you speak about like your whole experience obviously does like really, it makes a lot of people feel like really excited about it. So yeah, let's actually do let's begin our Q&A session right now. So let me just pick a couple of questions from here. How many times can you take the MCAT per year?
So you can take the MCAT like as many times as you want in a year, but there is a max amount of times you can write it like in your lifetime. I forget what the number is. It might be 6 or something like that, but I don't think there's a limit on how many times you can take it in a cycle, like in a year.
Okay, awesome. Our next question is, did you include any shadowing in your application? If so, which section of the ABS did you put it in?
Yeah, so I did include shadowing. I just included it as one entry on my ABS because, as I was mentioning before, it's really insignificant. Like, it doesn't show a lot about you, the fact that you've shadowed, because you're not showing any of your skills. But I did want to include it just to show that, like, I was passionate about medicine and I have spent the time shadowing physicians. So I included it under my other section. There wasn't really another section that I felt it like went well with. It wasn't volunteering and it wasn't an extracurricular. So I put it under that section, and then I just put like shadowing as an entry and then filled in the different specialties that I'd shadowed.
Awesome. Did you fill out all of the available 36 sections for ECs?
Yeah, so I did fill out all of my 32 entries.
32, okay.
This is again, yeah, 32. It's a controversial subject or like topic on whether or not to like build up your application and fill up all of them or leave some entries blank. And in terms of my application, I had more than 32 entries. Like I wasn't on the lesser side of entries, I guess you could say. But I would say to be careful on what you are calling an entry on your sketch. So for example, like I had activities where I volunteered at just for a day, but those aren't worthy of a full entry on a sketch, if that makes sense, because they're not showing any of my skills or anything just to volunteer at something random for a day. Like I wasn't going to waste an entry on that. So I think, say, if you had like 24 really meaningful entries, then don't feel the need to pad your application and add in a bunch of other kind of more insignificant entries. So only fill it up to 32 if they're 32 things that you've been a part of for a long time and are meaningful to you.
For sure. Our next question is, what did you include in the research section of the ABS? I heard that you can only include publications / poster presentations.
Yeah, so the research section is interesting. I actually didn't know that until I went to apply. So you're right that you can only include publications or research presentations. When I applied in 2018, we could also include publications under preparation or in preparation. So I included my publications that I was working on at the time that weren't submitted yet. Again, they may have changed that. You'll have to see when you apply. What else did I include? Trying to think. I know I had like 4 entries. Yeah, so a few publications in preparation. I also, this is kind of controversial, but I'm in medical school, so I guess it worked out for me. Over one of my summers, I spent the summer doing like an internal program evaluation where I did have to write a paper, but it wasn't published. So it wasn't like in a journal or anything. It was just an internal program eval. But the project still took me like long enough that I felt it deserved its own entry on my sketch. And again, I put it under the research section, but I made sure to include a note that like this is not in a published journal, like it hasn't been actually published, it's an internal review. So I would say things like that, you're probably okay to include. Again, it's up to everyone's discretion on what they include in the research section. I will say though that if you don't have any publications, that is fine because a lot of my classmates in medical school had never published, and that you can also include your research experiences within your volunteer activities. So, for example, some volunteer activities I did were research that didn't have publications involved, and I just threw those under my volunteer portion of the sketch.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Does the research portion of the OMS, AS, AVS only include things that are published or presented?
Yeah, so as I was just saying, when I applied, it included publications, um, presentations, or publications in preparation. So in my sketch, I included like things on those three categories. And then, as I was saying before, I also included an internal program review that didn't really fit into those three categories, but I still felt it was significant enough for an entry under research.
Got you.
So use your discretion, I guess, is my
For sure.
best advice.
Someone's asking, who do you pick as your references in terms of like what kind of people like were you asking to like write references for you?
Yeah, so this is really important. I think references also can make or break your application. And when I was choosing my references, you really want to have three people that can like speak to you on different levels. So like when you're applying to medical school, you want three references that kind of cover the six main traits that it takes to be a physician. So, for example, I had one reference speak along my research like capacities, like my scholarly traits, will you say. I had another reference that spoke towards my community service and involvement with vulnerable populations. And then finally, I had a reference that spoke to my involvement on the university campus. So I tried to pick three people that would talk about different things that all highlighted things that were important to medicine. And I will say, if you guys haven't heard of CanMeds yet, make a note to look into CanMeds. That's CANMEDS. You can Google it. And this is the framework that basically you'd want to base your medical school application on. It lists the six traits that every physician needs to have. So I kind of like when I was picking my references, I picked three people that would showcase these six traits in different ways.
My bad, I was muted, sorry. Did you
No, it's
have any
okay.
hobbies that were not verifiable, like reading, for instance, for your application?
Not verifiable. No, I didn't. Yeah, I didn't really include hobbies like reading. Like the hobbies that I included all had a verifier. These were things like playing piano, like I'd get my music teacher to verify that, or playing soccer, I'd just get my soccer coach to verify. Um, Again, if you're putting a hobby, like make sure it, I guess reading you could put down, but if you didn't have a verifier, it might be a bit tricky. Like the hobbies that you put, you want to showcase some trait about yourself. So, for example, when I put down soccer, I wanted to show that I had a lot of experience in collaboration and teamwork and things like that. And yeah, there is a lot of discrepancy on who can be a verifier. Um, like essentially anyone can be a verifier for you. So if you had a hobby that you couldn't get someone to verify, you could probably get like a fam or a friend or someone who knew you were a reader to verify for you.
Awesome. What would be some challenges of applying to US med schools with a Canadian undergrad?
Yeah, For US med schools, I know there's a different process. For one, in the US, they rank your MCAT score like really highly. So you have to score a very high score on the MCAT. Since I didn't apply to the US, I'm not completely sure about this question. I do have friends in my class who or like in my undergrad who did apply to the US that I could ask. So I'm not sure right now, other than MCAT is a bit different when you do apply to the States. But if you wanted to email or message me, I could try to hook you up to someone who can better answer these questions about going from Canada to the US.
You can always reach Danielle at through her Instagram or through her email that's on the slide over there. So
Yeah.
Next question is, how much does your residency, your geographical status play a role when applying to med school?
Yeah, so I think for schools in Ontario, obviously they'll accept a higher number of Ontario citizens, and they accept less from out of province and international students. So it definitely does play a role because there are less seats for non-domestic students. Again, that's not to say you can't get in out of province or from a different country. I know a lot of my classmates that are out of province students or international students. Just realize that when you're applying, there are less seats because majority of the seats are for domestic students. And I think specifically there may be a little bit more seats for out of province students than there are for international students. Like in my class of 270, I think there's roughly 10 international students. So it definitely makes it a bit more tough statistic wise, but again, it's definitely not impossible. And I would say in terms of prepping, do the same like prep for medical school that you would do if you were applying in your own province, as you would if you're applying out of province. And also keep in mind the different prerequisites that medical schools in different provinces have.
What is something that you wish you'd done in high school?
Oh my gosh, I wish I did so much more in high school. Like I was saying before, I was so late to start this whole process, and I think that's what really like motivated me to do so much in second and third year because I hadn't done anything. I wish in high school I got more involved in leadership activities. Like I wish I wasn't afraid to start clubs and things like that at my high school, but I just was when I was in high school looking back. But yeah, definitely like developing those skills. I wish I started volunteering at the hospital earlier than I did. I guess as much as I didn't prep in high school, definitely if you are considering medicine and you realize it earlier than I did, start prepping, like volunteer at the hospitals, do extracurriculars, volunteer, etc. Because again, you can include all of these activities on your sketch and it will help you like career explore, I guess, whether medicine is for you or not. So I definitely wish I started all of this sooner because it would have been way easier for me in second and third year university, but I just didn't know what I wanted to do. So good for you if you do know, and definitely start these things earlier.
How many research positions were you able to do in your time leading up to getting into med school?
Sure. So, in terms of research positions, I had four main research positions. So, the first one I researched at a local hospital in clinical research. So, that was one. Second one was I researched at the inclusive recreation facility I was talking about. So, for persons with disabilities, that was two. Um, Third one was in third year university. I researched in a wet lab for a full year. And then the fourth one was my NSERC project, where again, it was wet lab research over the summer. But in terms of my application, I only included the two positions because at the time of my app, I hadn't yet started the other two. So it was four before medical school and then two on my application.
Awesome. What would you say is the hardest part of being a med student?
Hardest part of being a med student. That's a good question. For me this year, I found the hardest part has been trying to figure out what I want to do, like specialty wise, because there is a lot of pressure to decide early on. it's kind of like the medical school process where you have to know you want to go to medical school like years in advance. It doesn't just happen the day before. Specialties are the same because again, the match process to specialties is very competitive. So I would say like trying to figure it out has been hard for me because so far I like everything that we study. Like I haven't been drawn to a specific field. And again, there is a bit of pressure like from my peers that already know what they want to do. Um, yeah, it just puts pressure on you to try and figure it out too. But I would say like whereas my in university, the hardest thing was balancing like a gazillion activities at once and keeping up a high GPA. It's not nearly as difficult in medical school just because you have a lot more time on your hands and it's a lot more relaxed in that regard. And I guess like due to the pandemic, that's imposed a whole other set of difficulties because we can't go to the hospital anymore or like indefinitely until 2021. So that's going to be challenging moving forward. But over the past year, definitely trying to figure out what I was interested in.
For sure. That seems like a very
Mhm.
stressful process.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
Do you enjoy U of T and or like the community?
Yeah, I really like the community. I was kind of intimidated to go to U of T because I came from such a small undergrad school that only had like 10,000 students. I literally knew everyone on campus, whereas U of T is so big. But I find because we're always with the med students, which is about like 270 of us in close proximities, you feel like you're a part of the med community there. Like you're kind of you don't interact with the undergrad students, which is where most of the student body is. So you're just interacting with medicine. So it's a really nice, like tight knit community, although there are a lot of students. And U of T has just been great too because we're divided kind of like Hogwarts into academies. So each med student has their own academy, and you really get to know the people within your academy. It's like the people you do all of your clinical learning with and things like that. So definitely there's a good sense of community at U of T. And I know U of T has like not a bad reputation, just they're known to be really competitive in undergrad or to be a really tough school. And that's definitely like, I didn't go there for undergrad, but it's definitely not the case for medicine. Like, all of the professors are there to support us, our peers are there to support us. Again, there isn't this culture of like everyone competing with each other because our grades don't really matter anymore. So if you have any of those rumors in your head, to disregard them for medical school because it's not like that.
For sure. Someone's asking, what should I do in high school now that will help me apply to med school and be successful later on?
Yeah, so in high school now, I guess looking back, let me just pull up. Looking back towards these six categories, you kind of want to look at these now and figure out how you can get involved in activities that fill these categories. So whether that's, again, like I said, starting clubs in high school or working in high school, just things that you can put on your application in the future, whether it be volunteering, any awards. I know it's hard to get involved in research in high school, and I wouldn't really um, focus too much on that. And if I'm being completely honest, like the things you do in high school don't really matter on your application nearly as much as what you do in undergrad. And I think that's why it didn't have such a negative impact on my application that I wasn't involved in high school, because really they're looking at like, once you enter university, what have you been doing? So on my like entire sketch, I only had, I think, like 2 or 3 entries from 16 to 17, like those age ranges, but the rest was more recent within like university and beyond. So yes, it's good to think of these categories while you're going through high school and try to find activities to be involved with, but realize that like activities you do in high school won't be as meaningful as those that you do in university. And if anything, like try to think of, again, I talked about making a story with your application. So think of things you can do in high school that you can carry on to university that are more longitudinal. So maybe you'll start volunteering at an organization in high school and then carry that on in university. That would be really beneficial.
For sure. Someone's asking, what does your day, what does your day schedule look like in terms of like school, studying, self-care, stuff like that?
Hmm. Yeah, so, well, I'll tell you my day schedule before the pandemic because it was a lot more structured. Like right now, I just stay home and study. But anyways, before the pandemic, typical med school day was usually I'd go to school like for the morning, maybe listen to lectures or do some other activity. Um, in the afternoon, usually I'd go to the hospitals for again another class, whether it was like clinical skills or whatever. It's kind of like the best way to describe it is it's like a high school day. You go to classes from 9 to 4, and then you have your evenings off, which is a lot different than university where your hours are all over the place. Um, so yeah, for the most part, it was like 95 days split between campus and the hospital. Again, as I mentioned before, we have Wednesdays off, so we get one day off, which is really nice. Um, and then after school, yeah, if I had extracurriculars, I would go to those after school, but it was a lot more self-care than an undergrad. Like a lot less busyness, a lot more socializing. Yeah, and just if I had extracurriculars, I'd do that. On some evenings, I would do research in the evenings, like at an institute. So it can be as busy as you want it to be, but in general, the schedule is like high school, 9 to 5 or like 8 to 4 days.
For sure. Someone's asking that if they don't get into the first two cycles, like what can they do in terms of like applying to med school again?
Yeah, so I think if you don't get in, like, I know it's discouraging, but realize that a lot of people, it takes 2 or 3 cycles to get in. And I think if you didn't get in after 2 cycles, really try to analyze and evaluate your application. Like, see if you can locate any gaps in your application that might be weaker than others, and maybe spend the next year trying to fill in those gaps, would be my best advice. Or if you feel your application is really strong, maybe it's your references or other things in the application, your essays. Like, keep in mind that your sketch is one thing, but each of the schools value different aspects of the application more than others. So it could be another part that you haven't even like looked at. I know one of my friends, she realized this year that her references were bad from last year and then ended up getting an interview this year because she changed out one reference. So just a lot of self-reflection. And again, if you'd like my opinion on anything, please feel free to contact me and I'd be happy to look over your stuff and try to pinpoint anything that I think might be not wrong, but like could be improved upon.
Do you have any peers in med school who didn't study sciences or had a degree in another discipline like engineering or business?
Yeah, yeah. I have a lot of peers in my class that weren't pre-med students, so they like graduated from engineering. I have some arts majors, a lot of random things in my class actually. So you definitely don't have to do a degree in science or anything as long as you do write the MCAT. And I think it's almost if you have a high GPA and do well in the MCAT, it's kind of an advantage to come from a program that's not as generic as the sciences, because I feel as though med schools really value that their class is very diverse and students come from a wide variety of backgrounds. So if you are a student that took a non-traditional route, that shouldn't be a disadvantage to you at all, as long as you're still making sure that your application is complete with all the things I've talked about.
Awesome. And do you have any recommendations on how we can stay competitive during the pandemic in terms of med school? Someone's asking because most of their volunteer and extracurricular activities have been canceled as a result of it.
Yeah, I know it's really hard for medical students right now. I've been asked this question a lot, and I think in terms of advice, like obviously don't get involved in anything that you feel uncomfortable with or could put your health or your family's health at risk. But if you're able to, maybe see in your community if there's any organizations that you can be a part of during this pandemic. Like I know, for example, I'm calling seniors now, which I wasn't before, just because they may be lonely and have no one to talk to. So little initiatives like that in your community, if you can find any that you'd like to take part in, maybe grocery delivering, etc., I think those would be really great. I also think if there's any like nonprofit community organizations like OMS or Pump Professionals, like if you took the initiatives to get involved in any of those that you could do from home remotely, again, to gain some experience. And The other thing I was going to mention is if you're looking into research, now is actually a great time to email researchers because they'll need help doing their projects, especially if they're physicians because they're so busy at the hospital. So yeah, if you're looking into research, maybe now is a good time to cold email supervisors and see if you can get involved in anything remotely that you can do at home. Again, I know it's really hard because all of your like volunteering and extracurriculars are canceled, but just try to think of innovative ways to still find opportunities within your community wherever you are.
Awesome. We'll take one last question. Can you
Sure.
recap what you explained about the small assessments that you have routinely in terms of like midterms and exams?
Yeah, so
Sorry, they didn't specify whether it was med school or your undergrad. So
sure. So this was med school that I was talking about this. So essentially the way our curriculum is that we learn everything in what's called a block. So our blocks are 2 to 4 weeks long. So there's multiple blocks like throughout a year. And each of these blocks are centered around a specific topic. So for example, we'll have a block in like cardio, the heart, or a block in respiratory, the lungs, or a block in GI, like the digestive tract. And these go on all throughout the year. And at the end of each of these blocks, which again are 2 to 4 weeks, we'll have an exam. So every 2 to 4 weeks, we will have an exam. Um, Instead of having like final exams in December that covers everything through the term. So each 2 to 4 weeks we'll have an exams, which are the low stakes assessments I was talking about. But we don't have any finals or midterms anymore, which is really nice because if you're a university student, you know how stressful that is. And just with the sheer material that you learn in med school, like I can't imagine doing midterms and finals. I know like other medical schools like Ottawa does that, and now that I'm used to Toronto's like low stake assessments, it's really nice. And one last thing to note about the blocks is that say you're in a block of like 2 to 4 weeks that studies the heart per se. All of your lectures will be about the heart, and then you'll go to anatomy and you'll dissect the heart, and then you'll go to clinical skills and you'll listen to the heart, and all of your learning activities for that block will be centered around that organ system, which I also really like because it kind of integrates all of our learning and condenses our knowledge. I hope this makes sense. I know on my Instagram page, like I always say what block I'm in and kind of talk about it a bit more. So if you have any questions, check that out, or I'm happy to take questions too by contacting me.
and that same person is asking one more question before we finish up. Also, what was the program or organization you mentioned for talking to seniors?
For talking to seniors, the program that I'm involved in is a specific program for medical students. It's called, oh my gosh, Student Seniors Isolation Prevention Program, or SSIPP. Again, that's only for medical students to be involved in, but it's a good example of things you can do in this pandemic. Like I'm sure, and I have seen other programs that are kind of along the same lines that you can get involved in. Again, it depends where you live. Like I'm in the GTA, I'm not sure where everyone else is, but kind of look into these programs that you can do safely from home. Yeah, that you can add to your application too. And another thing is, I'm pretty sure like medical schools moving forward, they know about the pandemic obviously, and they'll take into account that students aren't able to participate in their full capacity during the pandemic. So I know it's stressful right now, but I'm sure they will be lenient if you're not super involved during this pandemic because it's really hard to be.
Awesome. That was our last question. So Danielle, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was so fun chatting with you all, and I hope this gave you a bit more insight into like what you can do to prepare for med school, and some examples of activities. Like by no means follow exactly what I did, but I just wanted to give you an idea of my thought process going through my years leading up to my application.
Awesome. Again, if any of you are interested in connecting with Danielle, her socials are posted over here at medbyme and medicinebyme@gmail.com if you wish to contact her. And that will be all for this week. Thanks for attending, everyone. Just a quick sneak peek for next week. We'll be joined by Vinyas Harish. Vinyas Harish is a third-year MD PhD student at the University of Toronto's Faculty of Medicine and Dalla Lana School of Public Health. Upon completing his pre-clerkship medical training, Vinyas has started doctoral studies exploring applications of machine learning in clinical and population-level risk prediction, as well as preparedness for global health emergencies. He's a doctoral fellow in the Collaborative Specialization in Global Health and is supervised by Dr. Laura Rosella and Canada Research Chair in Population Health Analytics. Vinyas completed his undergraduate degree in the Biomedical Computation program in the School of Computing at Queen's University. Everyone, that concludes this week's webinar. Again, thanks, Danielle, for coming in. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye, guys.
Bye. Have a great day.